Here we go. Good. Good. So the aim for the next 60 minutes, and I hope that I'm more time sensitive than before, is actually to show you about some good practices or some best practices which we are still collecting at Microsoft and are putting in place day by day. And these are just some gems out of it. So the idea is to show you how we measure if the customer likes and uses it, to show how we measure, so how we actually implement, we test in production sort of thing, how we, from a cultural perspective, what do we actually allow our engineers to do and not to do in terms of, for example, choosing on what they want to work and to what team they want to belong, for example. Then the shift left aspect, the shift left quality aspect, 1-2 samples, and then infrastructure as a service oriented topics. If you want to know all that more in detail, if you want to know all about that more in detail, there is something which is called DevOps at Microsoft. So we haven't produced a book or something, or a booklet or an ebook. It's just a collection through different articles which is describing what we are constantly learning. So that collections of learnings is constantly being enriched with things. So on one side, here at the bottom, this is our learnings about specific about DevOps, about how we are leveraging Git and the Git flows and so on, and about being agile. But also here on the top, for example, if you're interested in how Microsoft is actually applying the culture of DevOps, there are a lot of articles actually describing it. Also setting the expectation right. Usually when I show Azure DevOps to customer, at the end they tell me, that's cool, I like it, but I want to do it right from the beginning, which is good. And then they ask me, can you share with us some best practices? Because I've seen that Microsoft is publishing, right, some best practices here. And there is a word of caution. We at Microsoft, actually very similar to what you are doing, are software producers. So our core business is to produce software and then to make a business out of it at the end of the day, right? So that's our core business, and these practices do only for us work in that specific context with that specific goal in mind. We have a lot of insurance companies, banking, pharmaceutical companies who also nowadays do produce a lot of software and have a lot and even huge development teams. But what is crucial is that at their core, even though software is crucial for them, the core business that they are in is actually not a software company, it's a pharmaceutical company or a banking company. So they still have a core business to keep alive, even though software is becoming commodity to achieve that core business, but it's still not their core business. So even though Microsoft is actually giving away learnings about how for Microsoft, Azure DevOps and DevOps itself is working out. This is not to be taken as, okay, then that's the right thing. We at Microsoft are describing how we tested it, why it did work or it did not work out, and that's the most important part. If you have the same setup, the same requirements, the same condition, potentially that's going to also work for you. But if you're coming as from a different angle or from having different requirements, potentially you're just learning why something works good or why not. But that does not mean that the Microsoft way is the right way also for you. That said, just as an example, I was shortly on the GitHub repository for the DNN platform, but I did not check the repository in detail. Is that like one big giant repository, or are we talking about different, like 10, 20, 100 different repositories making the platform? So one big or a lot of small ones?
Some smaller ones, not bigger.
Yeah, we currently on GitHub we have two main repositories.
Okay.
The one there's the platform one, which is the main one, and we have one which is called admin experience. And the admin experience is a management UI thing.
Okay.
And currently it's like a hot topic whether we integrate even those two to bring it together.
Okay. But the non-admin experience, or the core one, is one big repository.
Yeah.
Having a folder structure and a lot of features in it.
Absolutely.
So we at Microsoft have debated a lot. Let me see if it's somehow a bit more readable about, okay, do we go with something like mono repository or not? And what we figured out after testing out actually both different things, for each and every feature its own repository, or having one big repository, our learning was that our teams, 65,000 people, work better on one big repository.
Yeah.
Somehow it doesn't resonate with me, but that's the fact. It's just by having some KPIs, those teams were working far better with one big repository. For example, for the whole Azure DevOps stack is one big. So these sort of learnings is it's not right or wrong, is that this has worked for us.
I can tell you in our community currently it's very passionate, this debate.
Okay, so what we have learned there is just you need to have some KPIs to measure it. It cannot just be a religious debate. It's okay, then let's measure it. Okay. How many bugs do we have if we have this sort of setup, or how much effort is needed to come to a production thing with this setup or the other setup. And just to give you a look into the Microsoft world. Yes, so what you're seeing here, and I'm wondering why I cannot make this smaller, but potentially we can make that a little bit bigger. Yeah, somehow. It's unfortunate that it's a video, but what this is now, this is one of the feature team in Azure DevOps. So you're looking now into the Microsoft world. So please don't take any pictures, otherwise I'm going to have some feedbacks even over the weekend. So this is like the dashboard of, I don't know, I think of the project of the boards team, of the work item team that is working on that thing, which is Kanban boards and so on. So what they are actually learned, that such a board for all those people working it was very helpful for them. So on one side to know, okay, potentially there are teams with a higher volatility, so changing far more often. So they have some face over there. We have some direct links, so that yeah, sure.
Are you using the GitHub integration and keeping control in GitHub, or are you in DevOps?
The Azure DevOps, all the features are stored in a Azure repo, not in Azure, not in a GitHub repo. So if we're going actually into the
would this work also using GitHub?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I'm going into the Azure DevOps here, so that's a repository which, and that's something, again, Microsoft in the past, let's take the Internet Explorer and the JavaScript topic. We were able to build our own JavaScript interpreter because we knew it better, right? Nowadays, fortunately, we're saying GitHub is fantastic, amazing. And why are we building it? Instead of rebuilding our own sort of GitHub, or our own sort of Git technology, we are just leveraging it, and whenever we learn something or we want like to improve something, we go to the GitHub page for the Git technology and we do a pull request because we think that we have fixed something or we can enhance it. So this is Git technology out of the box, the exact same thing, no matter if it's on Bitbucket, on GitHub, on Azure repo, that's it. One difference, and this is more because of the Azure DevOps way of doing it, or Azure repositories are have been for a long time only private repository. We've introduced last year public projects with public repositories, but this is something fairly new. From an architectural view or conceptual view, this is all like internal facing, and you would have needed to onboard external people through an identity management system. GitHub is from a credo, from an approach, the other way around. Usually you want to contribute, you want to have different people, and it's open-faced. And then if you really want to close it, then you make it a private repo. So this is just one of the main difference. And you can have as many repositories as you want, but if you have just one mono repository approach, it doesn't matter, because as you can see here, all Azure DevOps, and there is quite some code into Azure DevOps, is all in that small repository. Somebody was asking something about testing.
Yeah.
This test management and the test framework behind it. So it's all within here. For the ones who have customers which still have the on-premise version of Azure DevOps, which today has a misleading name, Azure DevOps Server, and still customers are asking us, but we don't want Azure, we want something on-premise. It's just a name. Yeah. The whole server is still being developed here in one of these subfolders. So that's one of the learnings. And this was just an abstract. And a lot more learnings are actually can be taken out of this big. It's like a booklet from the engineering and the cultural aspect, from how we are leveraging our own tools and even other tools. Yes. Sure. Question first.
Somebody who just wants to work on a tiny bit needs to download a terabyte of bit history?
Some sort of. Yeah. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we have implemented this GFL, this Git for large file system. That was one of the needs that we've had. We found out that's the better way. Our file system was actually making issues, was the bottleneck. So combined with the Git sort of repo structure. So this Git for large file system or something like that. LFS, thank you. That was one of the reasons why we have actually contributed also to that. And this is helping us now with this sort of setup. Yes. Customer obsession. I have mentioned it. Just a second. Customer obsession means for us just gathering feedback. That can be the developer community, all you, either connected with people from Microsoft or by reporting it to the developer community portals directly. That means having Stack Overflow. We have one internal, but also listening and being active on Stack Overflow. I don't know if it's mentioned here. What is not mentioned is something which I've shown over lunch. User voice. Do everybody know what user voice is?
Yeah.
Good. Are using user voice for DNN. That's something that we have practically each and every Azure service is represented in a user voice account. User voice is nothing else than a website, is a SaaS service where customers can give feedback. Yeah. And each and every Azure service has such a user voice account where you can give feedback to Azure SQL if you like to have something which is not yet there and be put in the roadmap. Behind the scenes, every 3 weeks, what our PMs, the product owners of those features are doing is they are scrubbing through user voice, taking the top ones that the customers are screaming about because they need that, and trying to put those ones into their roadmap. So they have their own roadmap, but user voice as a feedback tool is influencing the priorities of what they're going to build. So that's one opportunity. And then for sure, what we have is then just a lot of internal measurements. I think that will then come later. Yeah. So I've mentioned it also this morning. What we have also learned is that it's not anymore just writing software that works on production that defines our success. It's more the value, even if it's in production and it works fantastic, but it's just being used by one user. Is that really success? No, that's not success for us. So we needed to change the definition of done to make sure that it's done when it's used, so that you know that it's going to be used, and worse, continuously evolving it. If something is not being used anymore, and we have had a bad example right now, which is, for example, the cloud-hosted web load tests that you can have as a task, being it for CI or CD, we didn't see that much of usage or leverage by customers. So after a while, you have a return of investment which is not big enough, and if customers have an alternative, that's going to be either slowed down or even deprecated. Are you collecting somehow data in DNN?
Yeah, but not through this. There is usage
Analytics
data
for Google.
that yeah, no,
Okay.
there's other usage
Okay.
data coming out. A proprietary
Solutions.
protocol solution.
Okay, okay. So it's part of the core, but it's a proprietary.
Designed by the company that managed it
Okay.
back in the day.
Okay. Is it being leveraged? So are you?
Well, only
Are you
recently-
customers? I assume.
Yeah, only recently did we get now finally access to some of the data.
Ah, so it's a
Because as you
proprietary
could-
solution with the data collected and just by them. It was not collected for the
Yeah.
customer. Okay, good,
There's
interesting. Okay.
Some of those wonderful little details in our project.
Okay, so what they have done is right and wrong, right? Because
Yeah.
they were collecting data, and I
Right.
hope that they were recycling data to know, is it worth to invest
I think
further
so.
in something or not? The other discussion is then I
It's a
let
political one.
I let discuss up on you. But this is also what we are actually doing the whole time. Every time somebody is using it, we are actually collecting that information, and every time somebody is stopping using it, we are actually going to collect the information too. As an example, here, when you click on your face, if you want, so when you click on your avatar in Azure DevOps, you have the hello here. Okay. Anyway, I get constantly the new UI, and I don't like it. Where are the preview features? Because then
It was there where you were before.
okay, you see.
Click on the three dots.
Thank you. This is the good and the bad thing when you are an internal tester. You are motivated to test.
Yes.
Anyway, every time that we are actually giving away a new feature, we are actually giving it away with a feature flag, which is also a new practice that we needed to learn, that you are not just giving it to. So one thing in Azure DevOps is also the way that SaaS service is updating. So it's an only forward-looking update. If we update the system after 3 weeks with the new sprint and we have broken something, there is no rollback. It's just as soon as possible we need to fix it with a forward-looking update. So we will never roll back. And one way actually to also give new features to people is actually not just to just roll over all the enterprises that are not yet ready and need to have a governance over Azure DevOps, but it's just to give the opportunity to say, hey, look, that's a heads up. We're going to come with a global search service that you can search from one place, everything, work item, tests, files, and so on. And you can enable that. And every time somebody do actually enable it, we're actually explicitly tracking data. Every time somebody is disabling it, we are tracking data too to understand, is it because it's not used, or is it because it was actually hindering that user to do something else? So these sort of data tracking are actually crucial to know whether something is used and was continuously evolving or not. Do your customers somehow collect data too? I mean, independently from this proprietary solution? Is there any plan? No? Okay. Not even with Google Analytics or Dynatrace or application insights?
Google Analytics is implemented as a feature in the platform.
Okay.
I don't know how elaborate.
But basically, everybody does it any way they want to. So yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
lots of them collect data.
Okay, good. Fantastic. So that's just something that we have learned. The people behind Azure DevOps are very lean startup sort of fans. And one thing that we have learned from this new way of running a startup is what they call the law of thirds. So what does that mean? Usually when you ask for feedback and when you get feedbacks, you can say a lot of times it's like split it in thirds. People liking something, people saying, yeah, it's there, it doesn't hinder me, it doesn't add value, and people saying, I don't like that. And depending on the feedbacks that you get each and every sprint, the idea of the law of thirds is to say, okay, we can now concentrate on what people like, we can further validate if something which has have a neutral response is going to be liked in future or actually disliked, and we will skip completely whatever has been disliked already now. What that actually helps you at the end is actually to become more to condensate your work, to concentrate your work on what people like based on the feedback. So that's a very high level approach on why we're actually tracking data and how does that reflect in our backlog, in the priorities. So we are actually tracking it to be able to say 60+% seems to be worse or not yet clear whether it's going to be worse, and what is actually disliked by users, we are going actually to skip it as soon as possible. And that helps us actually also from a life cycle to not wait for 3 months until we get that feedback and we can take a decision, but to wait at the moment around 3 weeks, and then we know whether we are going to continue or not. What is actually the cycle of such a module being developed? Is it like it could be a week or a year, or is it 3 weeks, a month, 3 months?
It depends.
It depends on. So on the customization it depends.
Well,
I understand.
We don't work on custom modules. We work on full solution for clients.
Okay.
And we are
These are very
delivering,
individual.
I mean, 3 or 4 times a week, probably.
Okay. And from the core team, how regularly do you put some new modules out?
Well, we put a new framework out.
Okay.
From the core team, and that is a cadence of a major version per year. That's the target, and then a minor version every quarter.
Okay.
Something like that.
Just actually.
And if we catch something that is really urgent, then of course we have the ability to quickly react to that.
From a customer point of view, have you ever got the feedback whether that's good enough or it's too slow, or actually they anyway take like 3 years before they get it running, so it doesn't matter? Just wondering.
Yeah, that would be
great.
Sorry,
The problem with DNN is that you have to install that in order to get data. So sometimes it's difficult for people to install. I don't know, if we had to release every week, I mean, people would be
overwhelmed with updates from DNN. So it's actually
it's a balance between delivering too much or too less.
Okay, which is also, so these are the feedbacks actually. We at Microsoft are learning that the developer crowd seems to not get enough cool stuff out there, but we're also learning that enterprises are saying, hey, wait, we need a governance model which needs to be applied, and we have 600 people needing to write a documentation first. So you cannot just come up with every 3 weeks something new. Give us some control. These are the feature flags. So this is already learning. Good. Value. I already mentioned the feature flag. I saw the feature flag today too on the
Could be.
So the GDPR thing is like a feature, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it has some toggles that you can enable or disable stuff. So that's the same thing. Or am I wrong? This is just an assumption. It's just because I saw that.
It's not an Azure feature flag as such, but it's a feature flag conceptually in that, yes, this is something that will go out in the release notes saying, okay, this version now has GDPR support.
And usually can an end user control whether they want that module or not, or they get it?
This one is this was support, so they have to get it.
Okay, and so what we are doing actually with the feature flag is between the you will get it definitely, and we assume that it's going to help you, but are not yet sure. Okay. So the feature flag helps us to actually figure out whether a lot of people are enabling it, so downloading and installing it in your case, and it's going to be used. Then at a certain point, there is no feature flag anymore. It's going to be there, and that's it. So would that be an approach which also makes sense to gather earlier feedback, or is, as you're saying, they have some installation windows of every 6 months and it doesn't matter?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, interesting. Are there any customer running this like as a platform, right? So I understand having it on premise means IT involvement and all these cycles and so on.
99%.
Then it's a different setup, a different thing. Okay.
What is this on the last the dark launch? What do you mean by that? The last point?
It's something that we have learned is that if you, who of you have watched the Microsoft build videos or have been there recently?
I've watched the video.
You watched the video? Me too.
Yeah.
So what we have done in the past is shortly before an announcement, we have just added that feature without the feature flag, say, and then at the announcement say, bam, we have dark mode for Azure DevOps. And while Scott Hanselman was saying it, I assume he didn't not even finish the sentence. Everybody was clicking on dark mode. That had sometimes some drops in performance, like not just a % drop, but even an 18% drop in issues. Non-responsibility anymore from the system. Tactically, not so intelligent. So the idea of this dark launch is actually not to add a feature flag without actually any blog posts, without actually giving people the task of go and tell. It will be there. It will be there for a while. Then after a while, people are starting noticing it, either because somebody's telling me, hey, have you seen the dark mode, and so on. So slowly the adoption starts, which means that if we see a fast adoption of that thing in a really short amount of time, and that's a KPI that they're measuring, then we know, oh, okay, that's something people like, but we can actually go into production very soon with that. If it's actually not used, not seen, then potentially there is no interest. Or you need to measure it in another way. So that's like how the approach works. And really, we have had. Okay, I'm wrong. I thought that the maximum was like an 18% drop, but there is even more drops. By just having the unfortunate thing of saying, hey, cool, we have that now on stage. The last thing is this Visual Studio Online, and you as Microsoft users know that we are very good with naming, right? Visual Studio Online, which gets recycled for finally something which makes sense. It's Visual Studio Online because it's a browser-based IDE. Azure DevOps used to be called also Visual Studio Online in the past, but then people start realizing, oh, cool, I can now develop with Visual Studio, but in the browser. And then they saw Azure, they saw this pipeline sort of things that were like, huh? But I want to now the Visual Studio. Where is the Visual Studio part? Anyhow, when at Build they announced Visual Studio Online, that was already being used and previewed by a lot of people behind the scenes. So we knew that a lot of the developers already had the experience. So it was not like now 80,000 people coming and testing one website. Yes. So now you as a platform provider and independent software developer, I think that you don't have so much the challenge, but what we are actually seeing is that operating Azure DevOps is also crucial for us. And one of the aspects is that, let me show you, we have so-called software reliability engineers or system reliability engineers, SRE. And those guys are actually in charge of, where is it? Come over here. Or here. Where's my dashboard? Those people are actually in charge of being. They need to make sure that Azure DevOps works constantly. They need to make that bigger. And what we are actually reusing is a concept of swim lanes. For example, those DRIs are just feedback box by the end of the day that gets ingested either by the support teams or by the field directly. And this is what they're, so this SRI team is a constantly, is a team that does actually rotate. On a sprint, they're working as a developer in a normal development team, adding some code for a specific feature. And on other sprints, they are becoming the system reliability engineers. So they are the ones which call you at 2 in the morning saying, hey, that page is not working anymore. You need to fix that bug because the system is not operating correctly. And what they are doing here, they have a very specific swim lane with the aim of having no issue at all, no blocking issue at all in the swim lane. Everything needs to be solved as soon as possible. Whereas the other in the team are not working on that swim lane, but are working on all the other different stuff. So we are using the concept, for example, of swim lanes to actually see, even within a team working on the theming, so the black theme of Azure DevOps. It's here now. Even the team which works on that has a software reliability sort of task or engineers that need to take care that that thing is working, which is a big benefit to the to the organization if the teaming is working. Yeah.
Test plans, you said you would.
Let's go into the test plan mode. Not sure if it's coming later, but this live incident, blah, blah, blah. Good. I'm not sure if I have access here, but I can show you it over here too. See that I don't have access to the engineering test plans. Also imagine why, but I can show you here some test plans out of a demo environment. So regarding test plans, before I just explain what test plans are there any specific questions to the test plans?
Regarding testing or regarding?
Yeah, so regarding the feature or in general regarding testing.
Okay, so because I think for us the challenge is that one of the discussions we'll be having this weekend is how we can move forward with testing and to improve it. And we already have loads of unit tests that are running, so that part is
automated. Fine, perfect.
But we need a solution for the non-automated testing. So,
okay.
So to hand off to a larger community of people, say, okay, this is the new version. Now we want your feedback and to guide that process.
Okay, so what we actually have here is so the test plan feature is a manual testing feature where you can organize your tests,
right.
And those are actually bound if you want to. Let me see if it's here. Those are actually usually bound to an iteration. So with each and every sprint that you are delivering, you also want to cover some specific tests, either because they are recursive, either because you want to test again something which has been broken in the past, or because you're actually creating new software and you want to actually test something which cannot be automated by Selenium, like a UI test. If it cannot be automated like that, that's where you're organizing yourself. Now, from a test plan perspective, what we're usually seeing at the customer, so you have 3 ways on how to organize yourself in a test plan. The test plan is a simple folder file sort of structure. So you can also, in a folder structure, somehow create test cases and organize yourself. Now we have 3 ways of defining folders. So a suite is nothing else than a folder. A static suite is just a dummy folder. It's just there and you can add some test cases into it. And then we have 2 more intelligent sort of folders, or as they are called in test plan, or sort of suites. One is called the query-based suite, and that the query-based suite is based on the product work items. So the backlog that you have created can be defined by a query. So for example, all the bugs that are in that iteration 2 can be defined in a query. By the way, who is already using some work item queries in Azure DevOps? Okay. Who does not know what a query is? Okay, good. Then let's go shortly back to the query. Or here. Good. A query is a very actually straightforward concept. It's a straightforward concept. We have a backlog in Azure DevOps, which is just the list of items of requirements that you want to go and implement. The boards help us actually visualize in what state those requirements are. Then we have sprints, which are just an abstract of the whole backlog, but with the same concept, a board which shows on what you're working. Now, what we also have added into this project management thing is a concept of queries. Sorry, it doesn't. Yeah. Anyway, is a concept of query where you can define a query based on what are the items that you want to look at. So if it doesn't fit in just an iteration, but you want to know more about, for example, I want to have all the work items from type feature which are under a specific path in the product backlog, which are and so on and so on. And then you define like in a very simple where clause in a SQL statement, you define a filter on what you want to look at. Now, those query thing is very generic, but at the same time very powerful. You can have then variable like tell me, also I have a query like saying, give me for the current iteration all the bugs that are attached to me. I don't need to go and look for them every time through the backlog. I have a query already showing me with each and every sprint, I've still all the time the most current bugs which I need to work on. If you define such a query, such a filtering, you can reuse that query. Like here, we have this query showing all the features which are planned for the next iteration. An iteration is 3 months. It has so a sprint is 3 weeks, but an iteration for us is like 3 months. So all the features which are coming in the next iteration are now listed here. And when it comes now, when I'm going back to the test plan, I can now build a full test plan for the full iteration based on a query. So based on explicitly the filtering that I have done. So I want to test actually requirements. Fantastic. So I want to test a requirement, and what I can now do, if I do a query-based plan or a suite, I can actually do the same. I can use an existing query, or I can define a query. I want to test all the items which, for example, we have a form of tagging. For each and every work item, you can add tags. It's a very simple, basic form of tagging. If you're using tagging as a way of classification for your requirements, like a tag is used for operations, is used for administration, is used for KPI tracking. So if you're giving those features some sort of a tag which tells for what purpose it is used, you could use the tags here to say, okay, give me all the test case or all the requirements I want to test for administration. So I make a test plan for a specific set of customer, of early adopter, which are all the admins. And they don't want to test the cool feature of reporting. They want to test the administration specific features. So you add a very specific query, taking the tags as one of the filtering things, saying, hey, give me all the work items that are related to the administration platform. And then you have a set of requirements like here. Then you have a set of requirements like here. So those are the requirements, and now you can define a test case or multiple test case how to test them. And the second, more intelligent one.
That's just the text description.
Exactly. So let's open such a test case. Here we go. So such a test case is I'm testing now this. I'm testing now this requirement on the right side. So this is coming from the query. It's coming from the query. So I'm testing related to that. My test now is called verify that the notification is auto closed after X seconds. That's like a pop-up query or a pop-up test. So that's the test definition. And now in a test definition, you have test steps, as simple as that. And in the test steps, then you could potentially reuse some variables so that they can be reused. And we can go then later into the details, but you could then give concepts like, where is it? Is it here? But you could also define the platforms where you want to run the test.
Okay.
Especially for web applications, assuming that you want to run the test twice, once for the Chrome browser and once for the Edge browser. If this is a differentiation, you don't need to write twice the same test. You say, test it twice for 2 different platforms. So there are these sort of capabilities. But at the end of the day, it's a description of the test with the test tasks.
Where you define the platform?
I'll show you. It's not here. Oh. Just need to check where they put it, but I think it's here. No, just a second. Here, configuration. Sorry. So you can now say you have different configuration that you can optionally apply or not to a test case. It means that the configuration can be here, as we are saying, browser, right? Chrome, and we add a new configuration. Not this one, just a second. Let me add a new test configuration. It's easier. DNN browser test. Good. Now you can add this configuration saying, okay, I have a configuration which is the browser. And I want to test it on Chrome. And this is the DNS browser test on Chrome. And that's it. And then you add the second one, which is the DNS test configuration on Edge Explorer.
And how do you use this one?
And then
you apply that to a case.
Exactly. And then you apply it for the test case that you want. There will be test cases where you are testing an API. And an API is a REST call. You don't need a browser configuration. You do that only once in whatever manner. Or you say for REST APIs, you're always by definition using Postman. And you test the REST API, whether that was successful or not. But for a web test on the admin portal, you need to do it for 2 different configurations. And then depending if the test cases needs that configuration or not, you're adding all the configurations that you want to test. So this is this is the way that you can actually, instead of writing multiple tests, cloning, because it's the same test just for a different configuration, you write the test once, but give it different flavors on where they need to be tested on. You could also add like a matrix of flavors. I mean, these are just now, you could say, actually testing that application on Chrome browser, but on Windows 10, it's a different experience than testing the same application with the Chrome browser, but on a Mac. So I want to have now, I want to have even different flavors. Chrome on Windows, Chrome on Mac, and Edge on, actually Safari on Mac and Safari on iPhone. I'm just saying something. So then you can define those different configurations. Now, if I'm applying one of those configurations now, did you save it? Yeah. If I'm now applying this configuration, which has already, it has already one configuration applied. So let's run the test. Actually, let's change shortly the configuration. I want that one. So I have now 2 configurations, just generally for Windows 10, and then a special one I would now have been used like Mac with Chrome. So I'm saving this. When I'm now running this test here, I have something called a web test runner. So go and run those. Oh, okay, good. Now you see here at the bottom that we are running that now the test for the first configuration. So which means you will need to find yourself on a Windows 10 device. That's just by definition. So these configurations are not intelligent to go and check your operating system whether that's true or not. These are just informative. So if the tester doesn't care in terms of he does from a quality perspective, not look at the right setup, then the system or the web test will even not recognize it. It's just a matter of defining, hey, by definition, that test needs to be run on a Windows 10 environment. And then you go through the tests, blah, 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 blah. Just a second. Okay, sorry. I can show it also here. The moment I've added, I need to make that bigger. The moment I have added for the same test, the test 842, a second configuration here, I didn't have to clone the test. I have it now for 2 configurations. So again, if I'm running it, here you see it's asking for Windows 10. Fortunately, because of the, and here the same test is actually being asked to run somewhere else. Now, for such an environment, switching the operating system, it's not a good idea, or it's not so easy achievable. But you can imagine that this is just a navigation, it's just a wizard that helps you, that guides you through the test execution. I need to check at the time, but that guides you through the test execution. What does that mean? Potentially, you can now open 2 remote desktop sessions and go and execute the test there. The test pattern here is just to guide you through the test. And then we have, if you're using Chrome, not Edge, unfortunately, it's not yet there. If you're using Chrome, we have a Chrome-specific extension where you can also go and take a video snapshot or a picture snapshot while clicking through the test, which is then nothing else than adding all those pictures. So if I'm now here saying this is good, but this is bad, I can add just some comments over here. On Chrome, I can here, in addition, take some pictures, print screen pictures, or even video snapshots while I'm doing something. It's a Chrome plugin, and all those information get collected and attached to the test run. And the test run is the one that then at the end can be reused for different purposes. Good. Or actually not so good. Yeah, there is just too much to say. But I hope that, was this somehow helpful to get the head around test plans? Good. There are... yeah, it's at the beginning. While the sprint planning, you define the priorities that come in. You're not defining and writing the test cases there. You're just onboarding them in the iteration. Test cases needs to be written really in a TDD fashion. They need to be written with the requirements. A test case is nothing else than a rephrasing of a requirement, just in a testing format. As a requirement is that's one testing format, the test case at the same time. So the good practice is actually to write them together at the same time. So I write something I want to have, and I write something I validate if that's the case or not. And here it's just in the sprint planning, in the iteration planning in this case, it's the way where you are planning to execute them, but they need to be written with the test, with the requirements itself at the same time.
And how does that match to on the work? Sorry, on the boards, on the work items? If you go to any work item.
While you're actually now having a sprint running.
No, but I mean, if you open a work item, there is something in there. There's they call the acceptance
criteria.
Something like that. Does that link in any way to the tests or not?
Not through the acceptance criteria, but you will have a link to the test case, which means during a sprint, you can then add the test case. Here, you can then add a specific test case to a specific user story saying, I need to execute, so all those that you're adding through the iteration will be listed in the to-do ones. So and then, like a task, you're actually executing the tests. So there are.
So the acceptance criteria is what?
The acceptance criteria is just a field. So there are customers which don't want to use the manual test plans, but still they want to define very similar to definition of done. When is my task completed? And for them, they use just acceptance criteria. If you're already covering the requirement through a test case, you don't need, in addition, actually, to define it through a description, like the acceptance criteria. You have already test cases defining when is a requirement fulfilled or not. It depends, but it's not linked together. So I will share with you then later the remaining best practices, like red, blue team, and so on. I see like a green, a gray, red team or something like that. Anyhow, there are a lot of other practices too, and I'll share the deck at the end. But also, if you just want to know more, we are collecting all those stuff over here. This was just a slide deck abstraction of it. But if you really want to know, okay, how can I potentially improve something? What are some practices out there? We are collecting and extending all those best practices in this how Microsoft does DevOps. Yeah, with that, I think time is over since a while already. Thank you. And for any question, just approach me anytime.